She made it for me when she thought she wouldn't wake up again. If stories of love, healing, and second chances speak to your heart, please subscribe and stay with us until the very last chapter of this journey. The afternoon light slanted softly through the hospital window, painting gold over the linoleum floor of room 318 at Mount Sinai Hospital. The steady rhythm of monitors hummed in the background, a heartbeat of machines standing in for the one that faltered behind the curtain. Ava Collins sat at the little table by the window, her legs swinging above the tiled floor. She was 6, small for her age, pale from too many nights spent under the faint hum of hospital lights. In front of her lay a scatter of colored paper, a glue stick missing its cap, and a box of crayons with the paper sleeves peeled away from use. Her tiny tongue poked out between her lips in concentration as she drew. On the page, she drew 3 hearts, 1 red, 1 blue, 1 yellow, each slightly uneven, each outlined with shaking but deliberate strokes. Under them, she wrote in her unsteady print, "Dear Mom, Dad says hearts can be fixed, so I drew 3. Yours, mine, and his." The last "his" had a small smudge of crayon, the mark of a child who didn't quite understand what absence meant. She looked toward the bed where her mother lay, her chest rising and falling beneath the pale blue blanket, her face serene in sleep. Tubes trailed from her wrist like translucent threads, tethering her to the monitors that pulsed their faint light. Rachel Collins had been asleep for days. Complications, they'd said. A post-operative arrhythmia, they called it. Words too big for a child to hold, but heavy enough to change her world. Ava pressed her little palm over her mother's hand. "You'll like it," she whispered. "It's got sparkles. I used the good ones." Outside, New York City throbbed with its endless rhythm, horns, voices, and ambition. But inside the room, time had slowed into stillness. The scent of antiseptic mixed with the sweetness of the strawberry lip balm Ava always brought her mother. She'd learned that smell was memory. If she kept reapplying it, maybe her mom wouldn't drift too far away. The door opened quietly. A tall man stepped in, his shoes too polished, his suit too immaculate for this wing. Mason Whitfield moved like someone who didn't belong in hospitals, someone used to board rooms, not quiet rooms where life teetered on the edge. He had come because he couldn't stay away. It had been years since he'd last seen Rachel. Back then, she'd been a volunteer nurse with laughter that reached her eyes and a stubborn kindness that disarmed him at every turn. She'd been the only one who spoke to him after the Whitfield Lab's clinical trial collapsed, the one that took the life of a boy they'd both tried to save. Mason had buried himself in work and success after that. Rachel had walked away, saying some things couldn't be built from guilt. But now she was here, fighting for her life, and her daughter, sitting quietly by the window, had his eyes. Mason paused in the doorway, unsure whether to step forward. The nurse at the station had told him Rachel had no close family listed, that the father of the child had passed away years ago. That detail had struck him like a blow he couldn't name. Ava turned, sensing someone there. "Are you one of Mommy's friends?" she asked softly, her voice cautious but polite. Mason swallowed. "I used to be." He stepped closer, and his gaze fell upon the card on the table. It was clumsy and bright, made with the sort of honesty only children possess. When he read the words, the air left his lungs in a quiet gasp. "Dear Mom, Dad says hearts can be fixed. So I drew 3. Yours, mine, and his." The word Dad hit him like a sudden chord. He crouched down beside her. "That's a beautiful card," he murmured. Ava smiled faintly. "Mom says people get better faster when they see pretty things." She was going to read it when she woke up. She lowered her eyes. "She just needs a little more time." Mason nodded, but his voice trembled. She always did believe in time. A nurse passed by and whispered a reminder that visiting hours were almost over. Ava nodded obediently. She folded her card carefully, placed it on the table next to a small silver picture frame. And that was when Mason saw it. The photograph inside showed a younger Rachel in a bright red volunteer vest, standing under a summer sun beside a younger version of himself. The photo was old, edges bent, the kind people keep not for perfection, but for meaning. He hadn't even known she'd kept it. He picked it up slowly, his fingertips brushing the glass. "She keeps it there so I can see who she was before she got sick," Ava said. "She told me he was someone who helped her once. I think that's you." Mason's throat closed. "She told you that?" Ava nodded. "She said you were her miracle before I even knew what the word meant." For a moment, the world blurred. The city outside faded. All that remained was the soft hiss of the ventilator and the small child with the crayons. Mason turned away, hiding the sting in his eyes. He reached for the chair beside the bed and sat down quietly. Rachel's face looked peaceful, but it wasn't the peace of rest. It was the stillness of someone caught between leaving and returning. "I thought miracles were supposed to come once," he whispered, more to himself than to the child. "Maybe they come back when you least deserve them." Ava tilted her head, her little brow furrowed. "Mom says miracles come when you don't expect them, so you remember they're real." He smiled sadly. She would say that. The room dimmed as the evening deepened. The city lights flickered through the window like distant stars. Ava gathered her crayons, yawning, and Mason stayed a while longer, just watching the soft rise and fall of Rachel's chest. Before he left, he looked again at the card, the 3 uneven hearts glowing in the lamplight. He reached out and traced the yellow one, the smallest. "Yours, mine, and his," he whispered, as if reciting a prayer. And for the first time in years, Mason Whitfield felt something break open inside him. Not pain, not regret, but something gentler, like a door unlocking. Outside in the corridor, nurses moved briskly, doctors discussed lab results, and the world spun on, indifferent. But in room 318, a card made of crayon and hope waited patiently beside a hospital bed, ready to be read, ready to mend more than one heart. The first alarm began at 2:13 a.m., a thin, piercing sound that sliced through the silence of Mount Sinai's cardiac ward. It was the kind of sound that froze blood before thought could form. Ava woke instantly. She had fallen asleep curled in the armchair by her mother's bed, her little blanket sliding to the floor. She rubbed her eyes and saw the red lights flashing on the monitor. Numbers on the screen began to dance, wild, erratic, like frightened birds. "Mom?" she whispered. Rachel didn't answer. Nurses rushed in. One of them, a tall woman with quick hands and soft eyes, pressed a button on the wall, summoning the emergency team. Another adjusted the IV. A third checked the heart monitor, her voice steady but urgent. "Ventricular arrhythmia. Page Dr. Chen now." Ava froze, her heart thudding against her ribs. All she could hear was the frantic hum of machines, the rush of footsteps, and someone counting. 1 milligram? Charge to 200? "Please don't let her go," she whispered. "Please." Someone gently guided her away from the bed, but she refused to leave. She clutched the small, folded Get Well card against her chest, the one she'd made that afternoon. It had bent edges now, a faint trace of glitter clinging to her fingers. Through the glass window, a man appeared, Mason Whitfield, still in his dress shirt from the day before, no tie, sleeves rolled up. He'd been in the hospital cafeteria, unable to sleep, when the alert flashed across the board. Room 3N18, cardiac emergency. He ran. When he reached the doorway, the world had narrowed into a blur of white coats, machines, and the relentless rhythm of the defibrillator. Rachel's body jolted once, twice. Then the line steadied, flattening, the sound long and merciless. Mason's breath caught. "Rachel!" Dr. Chen's voice broke through the tension. "Again! Charge to 250! Clear!" A spark, a shock, a gasp, then a faint, stubborn beep. A heartbeat, weak, uneven, but there. Ava, trembling beside the wall, pressed the card to her lips. "You said love keeps hearts beating," she whispered through tears. "So keep it loud, okay?" The monitor blinked again, steady now, fragile, but alive. For a long moment, no one spoke. The nurses exchanged quiet glances. The crisis passed like a storm that left the air thin and trembling. Mason exhaled, his palms pressed against the doorframe. The world came back into focus, the slow return of order, the measured instructions, the faint hum of the monitor like a lullaby trying to rebuild calm. Dr. Chen turned toward him. "She's stable for now. The arrhythmia was severe. We'll keep her under observation in ICU for the next 48 hours. Mason nodded, his throat dry. "Thank you." Ava ran to him, eyes wide with confusion. "Is she okay now?" He crouched down, resting his hands gently on her shoulders. "She's resting again, sweetheart. You did good staying with her." Ava looked down at the card in her hand. It had been crumpled during the panic. The corner tore slightly, one of the drawn hearts smudged with tears. "She didn't get to read it," she said softly. "I wanted her to see it when she woke up." Mason hesitated. Then, without quite knowing why, he said, "Then maybe I could read it for her." Ava blinked. "You can?" He nodded. "I think she'd like that." The nurse cleared a small space near the bed once the machine settled. Rachel lay still, her face pale, lips slightly parted as oxygen whispered through the nasal cannula. The overhead light softened. Mason sat on the edge of the chair beside her bed, Ava standing by his side. He unfolded the card carefully, the faint scent of glue and crayon clinging to the paper. The words wavered slightly where the ink had run from Ava's tears. He began to read, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dear Mom, Dad says hearts can be fixed. So I drew 3. Yours, mine, and his." His throat closed. He looked down at the child, her gaze fixed on him. Then, as he turned the card over, he saw something written on the back, something Ava hadn't mentioned before. The handwriting was the same, clumsy but certain. "Dad, if you read this too, please don't be scared. Mom said you saved her once. Now save yourself." Mason froze. The words blurred, twisting under the fluorescent light. For a moment he couldn't breathe. Ava looked up, noticing his silence. "That part's for you," she whispered. "I wrote it after she got sick again. She said everyone needs saving sometimes, even grown-ups." He swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. "She said that?" "Yes," Ava said softly. "She said you helped her a long time ago, and that maybe one day you'd need help too. I didn't know what it meant, so I just wrote it down." Mason's hand trembled slightly as he refolded the card. He placed it on the bedside table, right next to the picture frame. The photo's edges glimmered faintly under the light. Rachel and him, smiling under a Boston summer sky from another life. He remembered that day, the volunteer camp, the boy who didn't make it, the guilt that never left, and Rachel, her voice steady, her eyes bright, telling him that forgiveness wasn't science, it was faith with evidence. He hadn't believed her then, but now, sitting beside her unconscious form, listening to the monitor's fragile rhythm, the words came back like a pulse he thought he'd lost. Ava leaned her head against his arm. "She'll wake up again, right?" Mason brushed a tear from her cheek. "She will," he said softly, though the tremor in his voice betrayed the uncertainty in his chest. The nurse dimmed the lights, leaving only the faint glow from the monitors. Ava curled up again in the armchair, her small hands still clutching her mother's fingers. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed her, her breathing falling into sync with the slow mechanical hum of the machines. Mason stayed. He couldn't bring himself to leave. The night stretched on. Outside, the city continued its quiet rhythm, ambulances in the distance, a taxi horn, the faint hum of the subway far below. Inside the room, time seemed to pause, suspended in the soft flicker of green lights. He looked once more at the folded card. The words on the back echoed in his mind like a whisper from somewhere beyond memory. "Now, save yourself." He leaned forward, his forehead resting lightly against the back of Rachel's hand. "I never saved anyone," he murmured. "You were the one who did that. You always were." For a moment, he thought he saw her fingers twitch, just slightly, the faintest movement, like the first leaf stirring before a storm. He lifted his head, breath held, eyes fixed on her. Nothing. Maybe it had been his imagination. Maybe not. But as he sat there, his hand covering hers, he realized something he hadn't understood in years. Sometimes saving someone didn't mean pulling them back from the edge. It meant being there when they needed someone not to let go. And for the first time since the alarms began, Mason felt the sharp edge of fear soften into something else. Something fragile, but real. Hope. Morning came quietly to Mount Sinai. The blinds in room 318 were half drawn, slats of light falling across Rachel's face, pale but peaceful. Machines hummed like a distant tide. Ava was still asleep in the armchair, her small hands curled around a stuffed bunny that the nurses had found for her during the night. Mason sat by the window, jacket folded neatly on his lap, the Get Well card open on the sill beside a half-empty paper cup of coffee. He hadn't slept. The hospital dawn had that peculiar stillness, the kind that made him feel both alive and haunted. Outside, a gray drizzle blurred the skyline of Manhattan. Inside, the beeping monitor kept time with memory. He stared at Rachel and felt the years slide backward. Boston. 8 years earlier. Back then, Mason Whitfield was not yet the man whose name appeared in business magazines. He was 30, brilliant, exhausted, and newly anointed as CEO of Whitfield Labs, a young visionary who promised the world he could heal with data. The company's pride was Project Echo, a heart-mapping program that could predict congenital failures before birth. They'd tested it on volunteers at a children's clinic in Dorchester, under the supervision of a medical outreach team. That was where he met her. Rachel Collins, a nursing student volunteering over summer break. She wasn't intimidated by him like the others were. She'd offered him coffee in a chipped mug and said, "You look like someone who's trying to save the world before breakfast." He had laughed then, one of the few real laughs of that year. The program worked, until it didn't. A coding error in one of the predictive models went unnoticed. One child, a boy named Eli Turner, didn't receive treatment in time. He died. The press called it the Whitfield trial failure. Mason called it his undoing. He shut down the outreach overnight, absorbed the blame, and disappeared behind lawyers and NDAs. Rachel found him 3 days later, sitting on the steps behind the lab, rain soaking through his coat. You can't stay out here forever, she'd said softly. Why not? Because guilt isn't oxygen. You'll suffocate. He'd looked at her then, eyes rimmed red. A child died because of my code. You think that deserves forgiveness? She'd knelt beside him, umbrella trembling in the wind. Forgiveness isn't earned, Mason. It's accepted. He had turned away. Maybe you believe that because you don't know what it's like to be responsible. Her hand had touched his arm. You think I'm not? Every day in nursing school they tell us patients will die. And still we show up. Because sometimes showing up is the only way to keep a heart beating. That night, she'd left a letter at his office. He never opened it. He had locked it in a drawer, buried under years of annual reports and patents. Until last night, he'd forgotten it existed. But the words Ava had written, "Mom said you saved her once," now pulled that memory out of hiding like a ghost. Mason blinked, returning to the present. The ICU door opened. A nurse adjusted Rachel's IV and smiled faintly. You've been here all night? He nodded. She's holding steady. That's a good sign. He exhaled slowly. Thank you. When the nurse left, Mason turned to the card again. 3 hearts. 3 lives, all connected by something beyond science. He opened his laptop, the habit of a man who solved pain with spreadsheets, and began searching the archive of Whitfield Labs communications from that year. After several tries, he found it, a scanned image labeled R. Collins Thank You.pdf. He hesitated before clicking. The letter unfolded on the screen in clean black text. Dear Mason, you'll hate me for writing this, but I need you to know the truth before you disappear into your guilt. The trial failed because systems fail. You didn't kill that boy. You built the machine that saved the next 100. If you can't forgive yourself, then at least promise me you'll keep trying to build something that remembers him kindly. People think medicine is science. I think it's love measured in numbers. And you just haven't found the right equation yet. Rachel. The cursor blinked at the bottom like a pulse. Mason closed the laptop and pressed his palm to his forehead. Love measured in numbers. She'd said that back then. And now here he was, sitting beside the woman who'd believed it more than anyone, watching a monitor measure the rhythm of her heart. He stood and walked to the bedside. You wrote this 8 years ago, he murmured, and I never read it. I thought you were just another voice telling me to move on. But you weren't. You were trying to save me then, just like you're still saving me now. He looked over at Ava, still sleeping, her head turned toward the faint morning light. She was so much like her mother, brave, unfiltered, luminous in ways that hurt to look at. Around mid-morning, the hospital's volunteer pianist began to play in the atrium below. The notes floated upward, reaching room 319 like whispers through glass. Ava stirred awake and rubbed her eyes. Did she wake up? She asked. Not yet, Mason said gently, but she's fighting. Ava looked at the monitor. That's her heart, right? It's still working. Yes, he said softly. Still working. She slid off the chair and came to the window where the card rested. Do you think she can hear music? Mason nodded. Sometimes people in deep sleep can. Ava pressed her palm against the window. Then maybe the song will remind her of something nice. He smiled faintly. Maybe Boston. She tilted her head. You know about Boston? He froze, caught. Your mom told you about that? She said she used to work with a man who wanted to make machines that could feel hearts before they broke. Was that you? Mason's voice was barely a whisper. Yes, Ava. That was me. She looked up at him thoughtfully, as if measuring truth. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out a small plastic heart from a science kit. "I bring this everywhere. It lights up when you press it. See?" She squeezed it, and the toy flickered red. "It's not real, but it reminds me that hearts still glow, even when they're tired." He felt something tighten in his chest. "Your mom taught you that?" "Yes. She said light can travel through anything, even sadness." For a long time, he couldn't answer. He just watched the plastic heart blink on and off in the dim light. That afternoon, when Ava was taken to the family lounge for lunch, Mason walked to the hospital chapel, a small, quiet space with candles flickering under a stained glass window. He hadn't prayed in decades. He sat on the last pew, elbows on his knees. "If anyone's listening," he whispered, "don't take her. I can't. Not again." The words hung in the air. He wasn't sure who he was talking to, God, fate, or the ghost of the woman who had once taught him to believe in impossible things. As he left the chapel, he caught sight of the Get Well card still taped to the window. The paper rippled in the afternoon draft. 3 hearts, red, blue, yellow. For the first time, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Under the smudged crayon, faint but visible, Ava had drawn a small bridge connecting them all, a single line joining each heart to the next. He smiled, tears threatening. "You built the equation, Rachel," he whispered. "You and her. And somehow, I'm part of it again." He went back to the room, sat beside her bed, and took her hand. "Do you remember Boston?" he said softly. "The boy, the rain, the letter you wrote? I do now." The monitor ticked steadily, and in that rhythm he heard a reply, not in words, but in faith, exactly as she'd once told him. Forgiveness isn't earned. It's accepted. Mason closed his eyes, the sound of her heartbeat mingling with the music from downstairs, and felt, for the first time in 8 years, his own begin to heal. The storm rolled over Manhattan just after midnight. Rain streaked across the tall windows of Mount Sinai, turning the city lights into trembling gold. Inside room 318, the air was thick with the quiet hum of machines, an orchestra of survival that no one dared to interrupt. Mason sat in the same chair he'd occupied for 3 nights. His tie was gone, shirt sleeves rolled high. The Get Well card was still taped beside the window, its crayon colors dulled in the dim light, but somehow brighter than anything else in the room. Rachel had been stable all day. Dr. Chen had even allowed Ava to sit beside her and whisper stories. For the first time, Mason had seen the little girl laugh, a sound like sunlight breaking through clouds. But now the room was still again, too still. Ava stirred in her sleep, curled in the armchair under a hospital blanket. Mason rubbed his tired eyes, trying to focus on the numbers blinking across the heart monitor. 78 beats per minute, then 76, then 74. And then, nothing. The line steadied into a flat green horizon. No sound, no pulse, just silence. For a moment, Mason thought it was a dream. Then the truth landed like a blow to the chest. "No," he whispered, standing. "No, no, no." He pressed the call button. The red light above the door blinked. No one came immediately. The storm had caused a power flicker on the floor earlier. The emergency response systems were delayed by seconds that felt like centuries. He turned to Ava, voice shaking. "Sweetheart, stay there, okay? Just stay there." But the little girl had already woken. She saw the flat line on the screen, her breath catching in her throat. "Why isn't it beeping?" Mason moved to the bedside, trying to check the wires. It's probably just the monitor. It's not real. Ava stood up, barefoot on the cold tile. No, it's real. Her voice broke into a sob as she climbed onto the bed and grasped her mother's hand. Mommy, wake up! You promised you'd wake up! Mason reached for the intercom again, shouting this time. Code Blue! Room 318! Down the hall, a nurse responded, On our way! But Ava didn't hear any of it. Her world had collapsed into that small, quiet space between the stillness and her heartbeat. She pressed her forehead to her mother's arm. You said love keeps hearts beating, she whispered through tears. So keep it loud, okay? Mason froze. The words echoed in the air, tiny, desperate, raw. And then, impossibly, the silence broke. The monitor let out a single sharp tone, then another, then a rhythm, faint, irregular, but real. Mason exhaled as though he'd been underwater for years. Nurses rushed in seconds later. One checked the leads, another confirmed, breathless. It was signal interference. She's okay. She's still in sinus rhythm. Ava didn't move from the bed. She kept holding Rachel's hand, whispering something only a mother could hear. When the medical team left, Mason sat back down, every muscle trembling from the whiplash of fear. Rain hammered the glass outside, steady as the revived heartbeat on the screen. Ava wiped her cheeks. She heard me, right? Mason swallowed hard. I think she did. The little girl nodded as if satisfied with that truth, and lay back down beside her mother, half asleep. One small hand still linked to the woman who had returned from silence. Mason stared at the monitor for a long time. The heartbeat was weak, but stubborn. It was the same way Rachel had lived, refusing to surrender, even when everything said she should. He leaned forward, voice barely above a breath. You scared us. You know that? The only reply was the quiet, mechanical rhythm of a heart that refused to stop. He let himself drift back to that summer in Boston, to the way Rachel had once stood in the rain and told him that faith wasn't about knowing, it was about showing up. He had never understood that until now. An hour later, the storm outside eased into a drizzle. The hallway lights dimmed into their nighttime setting, a softer glow that made everything seem fragile and new. Ava was asleep again, her cheek resting against her mother's arm. Mason sat in silence, just listening. He thought of how many times he'd watched machines like this, not as a man, but as an engineer, a CEO, a mind that measured success in data points. For years, he'd believed hearts could be fixed with code, that science could rewrite sorrow. But now, looking at Rachel and Ava, he understood that the strongest medicine wasn't built. It was given, in whispers, in waiting, in love that refused to give up. The monitor beeped steadily, each tone a quiet vow. He found himself speaking softly to Rachel again. Ava thinks you can hear her. I think you can too. She's braver than anyone I've ever met. He reached out, brushed a loose strand of hair from her forehead. You always said love keeps hearts beating. I never believed you until tonight. Something in him broke then, not in the way that destroys, but in the way that lets light through. He leaned back in the chair, eyes heavy, watching the pulse wave roll gently across the screen. Each beep was a note, each space between them a breath. And somewhere between the two, he realized he wasn't afraid anymore. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The city outside began to hum again, taxis, coffee carts, 1,000 lives starting over. Inside room 318, 3 hearts slept in rhythm. One on a monitor, one in a chair, and one curled against her mother. A nurse who came in for rounds paused, smiling quietly at the scene. The Get Well card caught the early sunlight, and the crayon hearts glowed like stained glass. Underneath the yellow heart, Mason had written something new during the night. In small, careful handwriting, "Love keeps hearts beating. I heard it myself." He taped it gently beside Ava's drawing, then sat down again, whispering into the quiet morning, "Good morning, Rachel. Don't worry. We're still here." And this time he swore, just for a moment, he saw her lips curve, the faintest smile, like someone answering from a dream. Morning returned to Mount Sinai with a gentler kind of light, one that didn't blind but warmed everything it touched. The rain had washed the city clean overnight, leaving the sky a pale blue streaked with clouds that looked like brush strokes. Inside room 318, the beeps of the monitor were steady again. Rachel's breathing was shallow but peaceful. She was still asleep, but the doctor said it was different now. Not the stillness of danger, but of recovery. The kind that happens slowly, like dawn learning how to rise. Ava was the first to wake. She blinked at the sunlight sneaking through the blinds, rubbed her eyes and looked toward her mother. When she saw the rhythmic rise and fall of Rachel's chest, she whispered, "Good morning, Mommy," even though her mother couldn't yet answer. Then she turned to Mason, who had fallen asleep sitting upright in the chair. His head tilted slightly, his tie loosened, the lines around his eyes deeper than the day before. Ava tiptoed toward him and whispered, "You look funny when you sleep." Mason stirred, blinking awake. "Do I?" he murmured, voice rough with exhaustion. "Uh-huh," Ava said seriously. "Like you're thinking in your dreams." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I was." "About Mommy?" "Yes," he said softly. "About her." "And you." Ava tilted her head. "Did she wake up while I was sleeping?" "Not yet," Mason replied. "But she's getting closer." The little girl climbed up onto the chair beside him, resting her chin on her knees. "Can I do something to help her?" Mason hesitated. "You already did. You brought her back last night." "But she still looks tired," Ava said. "Maybe she needs something beautiful to look at." That thought seemed to settle something in her mind. She hopped down, rummaged through her small backpack, and pulled out her box of crayons. Only 6 colors remained. "I'll make her a new card," she decided. Mason watched her spread paper on the window ledge, tongue poking out in concentration. He remembered Rachel saying that Ava loved drawing flowers, not because they were pretty, but because flowers never give up on the sun. After a while, Ava frowned. "It's missing something," she muttered. "What's that?" Mason asked. "Real flowers," she said. "The kind you can smell." She looked at him hopefully. "Do you think there's a garden here?" Mason thought for a moment. "Actually, there is, a small one, for patients to visit when they're feeling better." "Can I go?" He hesitated, looking at the monitors, at Rachel's stillness, at the fragile peace of the room. Then he saw the determination in Ava's eyes, that spark he recognized now as her mother's. "I'll go with you," he said finally. The hospital garden sat on the third-floor terrace, a patch of green suspended between glass towers. Nurses came there on breaks, patients came there to breathe. The scent of wet soil and lavender drifted through the air. Ava walked slowly between the planters, her small sneakers squeaking on the damp pavement. The morning sun hit the metal handrails, scattering light across her hair. Mason followed a few steps behind, carrying a paper cup of coffee in one hand and Ava's half-finished card in the other. She crouched beside a patch of marigolds, their petals bright as tiny suns. "These are her favorite," she said. "She said they smell like summer." She picked a few carefully, then looked around and found an old gauze bandage in the nurse's bin nearby, clean, unused. "This will work," she said with the seriousness of a surgeon. "What will work?" "Fixing it." She wrapped the gauze around the card, taping the flowers in place. The crayon hearts still showed through, red, blue, yellow, but now there was one more thing in the center. A little heart cut out from the gauze itself, taped gently over the others. Mason watched, his throat tightening. "That's very creative." Ava smiled. "Now it's fixed for real." They stood together for a moment, the wind rustling through the plants. In that small, suspended garden, surrounded by skyscrapers, Mason felt something that didn't belong to science or logic, a pulse of peace, quiet but alive. When they returned to the room, the nurse smiled at the sight of Ava carrying her card like a sacred relic. "That's beautiful," she said. "Your mom's going to love it." Ava climbed up on the chair beside the bed and showed the card to Rachel. "Look, Mommy," she whispered. "I made it better." She taped it right above the monitor where Rachel could see it when she opened her eyes. The smell of marigolds filled the air, soft and warm. Mason stood beside them, his eyes shining. Something about the image, the child, the flowers, the beeping heart, lodged deep inside him like a promise. He turned to the nurse quietly. "When she wakes up, tell her I'm starting the paperwork." "What paperwork?" the nurse asked. "The foundation," Mason said. "For her, for them, for everyone who needs a heart fixed in ways medicine can't." The nurse smiled knowingly. "You mean Rachel's dream?" He nodded. "The proof of the heart fund. It starts today." Later that afternoon, when Ava was coloring in the hallway, Mason sat beside Rachel again. Her fingers twitched faintly, and for a moment, her eyelids fluttered. He leaned closer. "Hey," he whispered. "You've been busy saving everyone again, haven't you?" No reply. Just the soft hiss of oxygen and the faint perfume of marigolds. He reached for her hand. "Your daughter fixed your heart today. She said it's real this time. I think she's right." Her fingers twitched again, small, but certain. He smiled through the ache in his chest. "I'm naming the fund after your message, proof of the heart, because you were right all along. The strongest medicine isn't made in labs. It's written in crayon." He could almost hear her laughter in his memory, that light, unrestrained sound that used to cut through his darkest thoughts. "Don't worry," he whispered. "I'll tell her you said thank you." By evening, the sky outside turned amber. Ava pressed her forehead against the glass, watching the city lights blink on. "Mommy likes sunsets," she said. "She says they're proof that endings can be pretty, too." Mason joined her at the window. "She's right," he said. Ava looked up at him. "When she wakes up, can we show her the garden?" "We will," he promised. "And she'll love it." She smiled, satisfied. Then, glancing back at the bed, she whispered, "Good night, Mommy. I fixed your card." Rachel didn't wake, not yet. But the heart monitor blinked steadily, and the marigold scent lingered in the air. Mason sat beside them, watching as Ava fell asleep against his arm. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man waiting for something to end. He felt like someone standing at the start of something worth protecting. And under the lamplight, the card, patched with gauze and crayon hearts, glowed softly, as if alive. It read, "Dear Mom, get well soon." Now it's fixed for real. And in a way, it was. 2 weeks later, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the grand ballroom of the Whitfield Foundation Tower overlooking Central Park. The evening shimmered with gold and silver light reflected off chandeliers. The hum of conversation rose and fell like a tide. It was the annual Whitfield Labs Gala, but this year it wasn't about innovation or market growth. It was about hearts. A new banner stretched across the stage. Proof of the Heart Gala, in honor of Rachel Collins. Mason adjusted his cufflinks, trying to steady his breathing. He'd faced thousands of investors, journalists, and critics before, but never like this. This time, the stakes weren't profit margins or shareholder confidence. They were something much smaller and infinitely greater. The last 2 weeks had been a blur. Rachel was now awake, recovering in the step-down unit, her voice still fragile but her eyes alive again. Ava spent every afternoon by her side, reading stories and bringing paper hearts she cut from colored napkins. And Mason, he spent his nights building the foundation that Rachel once dreamed about, a program for free pediatric cardiac care, funded not by corporate philanthropy, but by people's belief in healing beyond science. The gala tonight would be its first public step into the world. Backstage, Mason glanced through the curtain. The audience was a constellation of faces: scientists, doctors, CEOs, journalists, and a few families whose lives Whitfield Labs had touched. But one face anchored him: Ava, sitting in the front row, her feet swinging above the floor. She wore a white dress and a pink ribbon in her hair, clutching the now framed Get Well card. When she noticed him peek out, she waved. Not shyly, but like a child greeting someone she already believed in. That one wave steadied him more than all his boardroom rehearsals ever had. As the lights dimmed, the MC stepped up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's keynote speaker needs no introduction, but perhaps he needs a reintroduction, not as a CEO, but as a man who found the proof of the heart where science couldn't. Please welcome Mr. Mason Whitfield. The applause came, polite at first, then swelling as Mason crossed the stage. He paused at the podium, took a slow breath, and looked around the room. But his eyes settled on Ava. He began, voice low but clear. When we think of healing, we think of medicine, of formulas, data, and technology. But sometimes the cure doesn't come from any of that. Sometimes it comes from a child with a box of crayons. The room went still. He lifted the framed card from the table beside him, holding it so the light caught the glitter glue and smudged hearts. This was made by a 6-year-old girl while her mother was fighting for her life at Mount Sinai. On it, she wrote, "Dear Mom, Dad says hearts can be fixed. So I drew 3. Yours, mine, and his." He paused, letting the words settle. That mother is Rachel Collins, a nurse who once believed love could save lives long before medicine could. And that little girl is her daughter, Ava. The crowd turned as cameras caught Ava blushing, clutching her mother's hand in the front row. Rachel, still pale but radiant, smiled faintly. Mason's voice softened. "I used to believe healing came from progress, from making something new. Rachel and Ava showed me it also comes from remembering what's simple, from presence, from love." He looked down at the card again, his voice thick with emotion. "The strongest medicine isn't made in labs," he said, pausing. "It's written in crayon." The room fell utterly silent. Then, somewhere near the back, someone started to clap. Another joined, and another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was standing. Mason stepped away from the microphone, overcome. He had written speeches before that closed billion-dollar deals. None of them had felt like this. Ava ran up the stairs, security scrambling but then stepping aside, and held out a smaller version of the same card. "This one's for everyone," she said proudly into the microphone, "so no one forgets." The audience melted. Reporters wiped their eyes. One woman whispered, "The card that healed the city." And by the next morning, that phrase would headline every major news outlet. After the speeches ended and the orchestra began to play, Mason stepped down from the stage. Rachel waited at the side, a wheelchair borrowed just for the event. He knelt beside her, voice low. "You shouldn't have come. The doctors—" "I told them I wasn't missing this," she said, smiling. "Besides, you didn't think I'd let you have the last word, did you?" He laughed quietly. "You gave me the words in the first place." Her eyes softened. "And you gave them back to the world." For a moment, neither spoke. The music swelled around them, a string quartet weaving something tender. Mason looked at her, then at the card she still carried in her lap. "You know, that night when everything went quiet, I thought I'd lost you." She reached for his hand. "You didn't. You just had to listen harder." He nodded, fighting the lump in his throat. Nearby, Ava had been scooped up by a journalist, posing shyly beside the framed card. "How did you come up with this?" they asked her. Ava grinned. "It wasn't hard. I just drew what was missing." "What was missing?" "Connection," she said simply. "Mom says hearts get lonely when they forget each other." The room seemed to exhale at once, as if the child had said what everyone else was thinking. By the end of the night, the foundation had raised enough to fund 3 full pediatric cardiac wings across the city. But the numbers barely mattered. What people remembered was the story. A nurse, her daughter, and the man who rediscovered his own heart through theirs. As the crowd began to leave, Rachel leaned closer to Mason. "You know what I want to see next?" "What's that?" "The garden," she whispered. "The one with the marigolds." He smiled. "Then tomorrow we'll go there. The 3 of us." Later, when the hall was empty, Mason lingered on the stage. The lights had dimmed to a soft amber glow. He looked again at the framed "Get Well" card, now hung on an easel near the podium. Under the childlike handwriting, a small plaque had been added. In memory of the moment, love proved itself real. He reached out, touching the glass lightly. "You did it, Rachel," he whispered. "You always believed hearts could fix each other." From somewhere behind him came the faint echo of Ava's giggle, the sound of Rachel's soft laughter following it. He turned toward them, smiling. For the first time in years, he felt completely certain. Not about data or destiny, but about something simpler, purer. The truth that love, once given, never disappears. It just finds new ways to keep beating. The rain returned 3 days after the gala. It came not as a storm this time, but as a slow, persistent drizzle, the kind that seemed to soak through even hope itself. Inside Whitfield Labs' headquarters on Madison Avenue, the euphoria of the Proof of the Heart Gala still lingered in the press and on social media. Headlines called it, "The Night New York Remembered How to Feel." Donations poured in from across the country. The foundation's inbox overflowed with messages, stories from families, children, and even doctors who said they'd been changed by what they'd seen. But success, Mason knew, never traveled alone. It always invited shadows. He stood by the window of his office, the skyline half blurred by mist, as his assistant entered with a file folder. "It came through the legal department this morning," she said quietly. "You should see it." Mason turned. The label on the folder read simply, "Insurance Claim, Internal Review Notice." He flipped it open, scanning the words that felt colder than the rain outside. Whitfield Labs and the Proof of the Heart Foundation are under review following a whistleblower report regarding the allocation of post-trial medical funds, particularly those associated with patient Rachel Collins. Mason's jaw tightened. Who filed this? We don't know yet, the assistant replied. But the preliminary contact came from Aegis Assurance, your largest insurance partner. They're questioning whether Rachel's treatment was a conflict of interest since she's connected to you. Connected, Mason repeated bitterly. She's a nurse who nearly died. That's not a conflict, that's a miracle. They're claiming it might be favoritism. They've already contacted the Department of Medical Oversight. There's going to be an investigation. Mason rubbed his temples, the joy of the gala draining away like color from a photograph. He'd expected criticism, skepticism about the Foundation's sincerity, maybe even political backlash, but not this. The assistant hesitated. There's one more thing. They've frozen the Foundation's operational account until the review is complete. That meant every donation, every fund earmarked for pediatric surgeries, locked. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Get me the board in 30 minutes, he said finally, and someone find out who started this. Down the street in the hospital cafeteria, Ava sat at a corner table coloring on a napkin. She was drawing hearts again, dozens of them, each one connected by small bridges of crayon lines. Rachel sat across from her, wrapped in a soft cardigan, still pale but gaining strength every day. You're quiet today, she said gently. Ava didn't look up. People at school were talking about Daddy's company. Rachel paused. What did they say? They said someone was mad because he helped you too much. Rachel blinked. Helped me too much? Ava nodded solemnly. They said it's not fair. Rachel reached across the table and touched her hand. Sweetheart, sometimes people don't understand kindness. They measure it like money. They think if one person gets more, someone else gets less. But that's not how love works. Ava frowned, thinking. So they forgot what hearts are for? Rachel smiled sadly. Maybe. But we can remind them. That afternoon, Mason met with the Foundation's legal and medical teams in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the gray city. Files, statements, and legal citations covered the table like a map of a storm he didn't yet know how to navigate. We've traced the whistleblower, one of the lawyers said. It's an internal audit manager at Aegis Assurance. Apparently, after the gala, some shareholders felt uncomfortable with how quickly the Foundation gained visibility. They're framing it as potential misuse of company resources for personal gain. Mason leaned forward, eyes sharp. Are they seriously implying I profited from saving a nurse's life? Not directly, the lawyer said carefully. But perception is powerful. They're suggesting your emotional involvement influenced medical decisions and funding allocations. They might push for a full suspension of your executive authority pending review. He felt the words like a distant echo of the past. The same tone, the same insinuations from 8 years ago after the failed Boston trial. Accusations, whispers, moral judgment wrapped in bureaucracy. Back then, he'd gone silent. This time, he wouldn't. Prepare a statement, he said, and schedule a press conference for tomorrow. The lawyer hesitated. That's risky, Mason. He met the man's eyes. So is letting fear rewrite what we built. That night, Mason walked back to Mount Sinai. He didn't tell anyone he was coming. Rachel was awake, reading by the faint bedside light when he arrived. Her hair framed her face in loose waves. Her IV had been removed. You shouldn't be walking around this late, she said softly. He smiled tiredly. And you shouldn't be sitting up reading medical journals. She closed the book. So who's going to tell the other first? He laughed quietly, though his shoulders sagged. They're investigating the Foundation. Some insurance executives are calling it misconduct. Apparently, saving your life might have been bad for business. Rachel's eyes darkened. Because of me? Because of us, he corrected gently. Because people don't like miracles that don't fit into spreadsheets. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly. You can fight this. I know, he said. But I'm not sure fighting is enough this time. It's about trust now, theirs and mine. She smiled faintly. Then show them what trust looks like. He nodded, but before he could answer, Ava appeared at the doorway, rubbing her eyes, holding her stuffed bunny. I heard voices, she mumbled. Are you arguing? Mason turned. No, sweetheart, just talking. Ava shuffled closer and climbed onto Rachel's bed. Mommy, are they mad at Daddy? Rachel looked at Mason, then back at her daughter. Some people are confused right now, she said carefully. Ava tilted her head. Can we fix them? Mason smiled despite himself. Maybe we can try. She thought for a moment, then pulled out a crumpled napkin from her pocket, the one she'd been drawing on earlier. Then give them this. He unfolded it. On it were a dozen hearts connected by bridges of color. This is so they don't forget, Ava explained. Hearts work better when they're connected. Mason looked at the napkin for a long time. That's perfect. He tucked it into his jacket pocket as if it were a signed treaty. The next morning, news broke across every outlet. Whitfield Labs under review. Questions over CEO's charity funding. Reporters camped outside his office. The company's stock dropped 5% before noon. But that evening, when Mason walked into the press room to give his statement, the cameras clicked and flashed, and in his hand he carried Ava's napkin. He began not with defense, but with truth. 8 years ago, he said, a mistake in my company's trial cost a young life. I've lived with that weight every day since. This time, a child saved mine. He held up the napkin. This was drawn by a 6-year-old. She told me hearts work better when they're connected. That's what this foundation stands for. Connection, compassion, and courage. If that's misconduct, then I plead guilty. The room went silent. Then the flashes resumed, slower this time, not hunting scandal, but capturing something human. Outside the hospital, Ava watched the live broadcast with Rachel from her room. When Mason finished and smiled into the cameras, Rachel whispered, He found his voice again. Ava nodded proudly. He remembered what hearts are for. The first snow of December fell over Manhattan like powdered sugar. The city looked softer than usual, gentler, as if even its steel and glass needed a moment to breathe. A week had passed since Mason's public statement. The storm of scandal that had threatened the proof of the Heart Fund began to dissolve under the light of something far stronger than controversy. Truth. Donations doubled. Letters arrived from children who sent in their allowance money with notes like, "For the hearts that need fixing." Even Aegis Assurance, the very company that had tried to dismantle the foundation, released an official apology, calling the review a misjudgment born of incomplete information. The board had cleared Mason of any wrongdoing, but for Mason, the real victory wasn't in the headlines. It was in the small handwritten note that arrived that morning on hospital letterhead. Dear Mr. Whitfield, Ava has asked if you would come to her class for Career Day next Friday. The topic is Science That Heals. Sincerely, Ms. Hill, 2nd grade teacher, P.S. 217 Manhattan. Mason read it twice before smiling. For all the panels and keynotes he'd spoken at, he had never been invited to a room full of 7-year-olds, which he suspected might be the toughest audience of all. Friday morning arrived cold and bright. Mason pulled up to PS 217 in a black sedan that looked absurdly formal in the school's pickup lane. The security guard checked his badge twice before letting him in. Inside, the smell of crayons, glue, and curiosity filled the air. The hallway walls were covered with construction paper hearts, snowflakes, and crooked letters that spelled out, "Welcome, Mr. Whitfield," in red and blue marker. Ava met him at the door, bouncing on her toes. "You came," she said, as if she had half doubted it. "I told you I would," he said, handing her a small envelope. "This is for you." She opened it, eyes widening. Inside was a laminated copy of her original Get Well card. The crayon hearts looked brighter under the plastic. "So it won't ever tear again," he said softly. Ava hugged him without hesitation. "You fixed it for real this time." He chuckled. "Guess we both did." The classroom was small and alive with noise. Desks pushed together, snow boots piled near the heater, and 20 curious faces staring up at him like satellites locked on orbit. Ms. Hill, a cheerful woman with a floral scarf, clapped her hands. "Class, this is Mr. Mason Whitfield. He's here to talk about something very special today. Science that heals." A boy in the front raised his hand before Mason even began. "Are you a doctor?" "Not exactly," Mason said with a smile. "I build tools that help doctors, machines that can look inside the body and see what's wrong with the heart." Another kid frowned. "So, you're like Iron Man?" A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Mason pretended to consider it. "Maybe without the flying suit." Ava whispered loudly, "But he has the heart part." Ms. Hill smiled. "And what made you decide to do this work, Mr. Whitfield?" He paused, glancing toward Ava, then answered quietly, "Because once upon a time, someone reminded me that hearts can be fixed, not just with machines, but with love." The class fell silent in that rare, sacred way children can manage when something true fills the air. Mason pulled a small cardboard box from his briefcase. "Would you like to see something?" 20 heads nodded. He opened the box and revealed several small paper hearts, printed replicas of Ava's crayon design, laminated and strung together by thin threads. "These are what we use in the Proof of the Heart program. Every patient who receives treatment gets one of these. It reminds them that no matter how strong science becomes, healing still needs hope." A little girl in the back raised her hand shyly. "What's hope?" Mason crouched down to her level. "Hope," he said gently, "is when you don't know if something will work, but you believe in it anyway." She thought for a moment. "Like when my cat was sick, and I kept drawing her pictures till she got better?" He smiled. "Exactly like that." After his short talk, the children took turns showing him their own inventions. There was a happy robot, a hug machine, and one rather elaborate contraption involving popsicle sticks and a hairdryer, designed to melt sadness faster. Mason laughed until he almost forgot he was supposed to be an adult. Before he left, Ms. Hill asked if he would sign the class poster. He wrote carefully beneath the word, "Science." "Paper can't cure illness, but it can hold a heart. Keep building, keep believing. Mason Whitfield." Then, as he was about to leave, a student called out, "Mr. Whitfield, what's your favorite invention?" He turned, smiling. "Paper," he said simply. "Paper?" they echoed, puzzled. He nodded. "Because sometimes one piece can save a life." The room went quiet for a heartbeat, then broke into applause, small palms clapping in pure, unfiltered delight. That afternoon, Ms. Hill posted a short video of Mason's talk on the school's YouTube channel. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. Clips of him saying, "The strongest medicine isn't made in labs, it's written in crayon," and "Paper can save a life," flooded social media, reaching millions. Comment sections filled with stories. Parents sharing their children's handmade get-well cards, teachers starting heart projects in classrooms across the country. One caption read, "This man didn't just build machines. He reminded us why hearts beat at all." At Mount Sinai, Rachel watched the video from her hospital bed, tears glimmering in her eyes. She smiled as Ava waved at the camera at the end, saying, "Hi, Mommy, see? He didn't forget to tell them about you," Rachel whispered to herself. "No, sweetheart. He never will." That evening, Mason stopped by the hospital before heading home. The city glowed through the windows, soft blues and silvers reflected on the glass. Rachel was sitting up this time, her color returning. "So," she said, "I heard you survived the second graders." "Barely," he said, setting down a paper cup of coffee. "One of them compared me to Iron Man. I didn't deny it." She laughed, the sound filling the room like light. He handed her a tablet showing the video. "It's everywhere," he said. "Over 2 million views in 12 hours. Rachel shook her head. "It's not about the views, Mason. It's about the hearts you reminded." He sat down beside her. "You know what Ava said before I left the school? She said, 'Mom's gonna like this one better than the gala.'" Rachel smiled. "She's right." For a long moment they sat in silence, watching the snow fall outside, each flake like a small piece of paper, blank and full of possibility. Mason reached for her hand. "You were right all along, Rachel. Love really is medicine." She looked at him gently. "It always was. You just needed a good teacher." He smiled. "Or two," he said, glancing toward the hallway where Ava's laughter echoed. By spring, the city had thawed. The frost that had lingered along the East River melted into rippling silver, and tulips began to bloom along Fifth Avenue. With them came the opening day, the day that had once lived only as an idea scribbled in a notebook, whispered in a hospital room, and drawn in crayon by a 6-year-old girl. Mount Sinai's new pediatric wing gleamed under the morning light. The sign above the entrance read, "The Rachel Collins Pediatric Wing, Proof of the Heart Foundation." The ceremony drew a quiet but reverent crowd. Doctors, nurses, children with tiny hospital bracelets, families whose lives had been touched by the fund. Journalists gathered near the back, cameras glinting like small suns. And at the center of it all stood 3 people: the woman who inspired it, the man who built it, and the child who made the world believe in it. Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she held the scissors for the ribbon cutting. Mason steadied her fingers with his own. Ava stood between them, holding the framed copy of her Get Well card, now protected behind glass. "You ready, sweetheart?" Rachel asked. Ava nodded solemnly. "Can I say the words now?" Mason smiled. "You sure can." Ava took a deep breath, then said into the microphone in her clear, bright voice, "This card fixed more than one heart." The crowd erupted in applause. Rachel cut the ribbon. Cameras flashed. The doors swung open, revealing a corridor painted in soft hues of blue and white. Along the main wall, just beyond the entrance, hung a massive reproduction of Ava's crayon drawing, the 3 hearts, the bridges between them, the small gauze patch that now shimmered like a badge of honor. Below it, a plaque read, "The strongest medicine isn't made in labs. It's written in crayon. M. Whitfield." And beneath that, in smaller handwriting engraved from Ava's original note, "Dear Mom, get well soon. Love is medicine too." The air in the hallway seemed to hum with quiet reverence. As guests wandered through the new wing, the trio lingered by the mural. Rachel ran her fingertips lightly over the embossed crayon texture. "They even got the glitter right," she said with a soft laugh. Mason grinned. "Took them 3 prototypes." Apparently glitter doesn't scan easily. Ava looked around, eyes wide. "It smells like new crayons in here," she whispered. "Is that on purpose?" Mason chuckled. "Maybe a little. We wanted it to feel like hope, not hospital." Down the hall, nurses guided the first patients into freshly painted rooms. Each door bore a nameplate shaped like a heart, red, yellow, and blue, matching the ones Ava had drawn. Rachel turned to Mason, her eyes shimmering. "You did all this?" He shook his head. "No, you did. I just followed your instructions. Build something that remembers love." She looked at him, the way one does when they see a truth too big for words. "You really read the letter this time, didn't you?" He smiled faintly. "Every word." For a long moment, silence rested comfortably between them. Then Ava tugged at Rachel's sleeve. "Mommy, can I show Daddy the garden?" Rachel blinked. The first time she'd heard her daughter say Daddy without hesitation. Mason froze, then smiled, a quiet, disbelieving smile that came from somewhere deep. "Of course," he said softly. "Let's go see it." The hospital's rooftop garden had changed since that morning months ago when Ava first gathered marigolds for her mother's card. Now, thanks to the fund, it had been expanded and renamed the Healing Garden. Raised beds overflowed with flowers, marigolds, daisies, lavender, and tiny sunflowers nodding under the breeze. A winding path of pale stone led to a small fountain in the center, engraved with a single phrase, "Hope grows where hearts meet." Ava ran ahead, her hair flying behind her, her laughter bright against the city skyline. Rachel followed slowly, Mason beside her, their pace unhurried, two survivors learning to move again in sync. At the fountain's edge, Ava knelt and placed a single marigold in the water. "This one's for Eli," she said softly. Mason looked at her, startled. "Eli?" "Mom told me about him," she said. "The boy from Boston, the one who didn't make it. She said the garden should remember him too." Rachel's voice trembled. "He was the reason we both started this." Mason nodded, his throat tight. "Then he deserves a place here." They stood together, watching the flower drift in the water until it circled the fountain and came to rest beside another, one that Rachel must have placed earlier. As afternoon light filtered through the skyline, the ceremony inside continued. Speeches, donors, photo ops. But out here, on the rooftop, time slowed. Mason sat on the edge of a planter, elbows on his knees. "When I lost my way all those years ago, I thought guilt was what made me human. Turns out, it was love all along." Rachel smiled. "You found a better equation." He looked at her. "You gave it to me." "Maybe," she said. "But you solved it." Their eyes held for a moment longer than memory would allow. Ava's voice broke the silence. "Mommy? Daddy, come here." She was standing near the corner of the garden where a bronze plaque had been newly installed. On it was the outline of 3 connected hearts. Below, in small script, read, "Dedicated to every child who believes love can fix what science can't." Rachel knelt to read it, tears welling. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Mason's voice was low. "So is what you built." That evening, as the sun sank behind the Hudson, the new wing's windows glowed with soft amber light. The city skyline reflected it like a heartbeat spreading outward, from one building to another, from one story to countless others. Inside, Rachel, Mason, and Ava stood by the mural one last time before the crowds dispersed. "Mom," Ava said suddenly, pointing at her own drawing, "you see that little bridge between the hearts? That's where we live now." Rachel smiled through tears. "Yes, sweetheart. That's exactly where we live. Mason slipped his arm around them both. For once, no one spoke. The silence wasn't heavy. It was full. The kind of silence that carries gratitude, memory, and peace all at once. The lights dimmed, and the last thing visible before the doors closed for the night was the shimmer of crayon glitter under the glass, still bright, still healing, still proof of the heart. Sunday morning in New York carried a quiet kind of magic. The city, for once, wasn't rushing. Steam curled lazily from manhole covers, sunlight spilled over brownstone rooftops, and the air smelled faintly of rain and maple syrup. Inside a cozy apartment overlooking the park, one filled with books, framed drawings, and too many potted plants, laughter drifted from the kitchen. Ava stood on a stool in front of the stove, clutching a ladle twice her size. Her hair was tied up in a loose ponytail with a ribbon that didn't match her pajamas. "Ready?" she asked, dramatically. "Ready," Mason said, pretending to adjust an invisible camera. "Chef Ava's famous heart-shaped pancakes, take 5. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, her legs tucked beneath a blanket. She was stronger now, though a faint scar still marked the place where machines had once fought for her heartbeat. A vase of marigolds sat beside her coffee cup, a gift from the hospital garden the day she was discharged. Ava poured batter onto the pan, the sizzling sound filling the small kitchen. "Oops," she said as one pancake came out looking like a cloud. "That one's for you, Daddy." "It's kind of broken." Mason smiled, flipping it carefully. "Then it's perfect. Broken things just have more stories." Rachel chuckled. "You two are ridiculous." "You love it," Mason teased. She sipped her coffee. "I do." The smell of pancakes, butter, and cinnamon filled the apartment, a scent that had once belonged to other people's lives. But now it belonged to them. After breakfast, Ava darted to her room and returned carrying something old but carefully preserved, the original Get Well card. Its edges were yellowed, the paper soft from being handled so often. "I think we should put it in a frame," she said, "right next to Mommy's letter." Mason glanced at Rachel. They'd found that letter months ago, the one she'd written to him years before, the one that had survived guilt, time, and loss. Now, it rested on the mantel beside photos of the hospital wing and the first group of children treated there. Rachel ran her fingers over the card. The glitter still caught the light, faint but stubborn. "It doesn't need a frame anymore," she said softly. "It's already in us." Ava frowned, thinking, "But if we don't frame it, how will people see it?" Mason smiled. "Maybe they already do. Every time they walk into the new hospital wing." Ava grinned. "Oh, yeah. My picture's famous." Rachel laughed. "You mean our picture?" Ava wrinkled her nose. "Okay, maybe a little bit yours." "Generous of you," Mason said, winking. Later that day, they went for a walk through Central Park. Spring was in full bloom. Daffodils, tulips, the hum of distant jazz from a street musician. Rachel walked slowly, her arm looped through Mason's. Ava skipped ahead, chasing pigeons that were never quite slow enough. At the fountain near Bethesda Terrace, she stopped suddenly and called out, "Mommy! Daddy, look!" They walked over to find her crouched beside a group of children writing messages on colored paper. A volunteer handed her a sheet shaped like a heart. "It's for the Proof of the Heart project," the volunteer explained. "Kids write notes to patients recovering in hospitals." Ava beamed. "That's my project." Mason smiled. "It is now." Ava took the paper and began writing carefully in bright pink marker. When she was done, she held it up proudly. "Dear friend, hearts get tired, but love never does." Rachel blinked back tears. That's beautiful, Ava. The volunteer asked if they wanted to take a family photo for the wall of messages. Ava squeezed between them, her arms around both parents. The camera clicked, one flash freezing everything they'd almost lost and everything they'd found again. That evening, as the city dimmed into twilight, the three of them curled up on the couch. The TV played softly in the background, but no one was really watching. Rachel leaned her head against Mason's shoulder. Do you ever think about how close we came to losing all this? He nodded. Every day, and every time, I end up thinking about how we got it back instead. She smiled, tracing the outline of his hand with her fingers. That's a better story. From her spot on the rug, Ava piped up without looking away from her drawing. It's not the end, though, right? Stories don't stop just because people get happy. Mason grinned. No, sweetheart. They just get quieter. Rachel looked over at her daughter's paper. What are you drawing now? Ava held it up. 3 hearts again, this time surrounded by stars. Our family. I made the lines thicker this time so they don't ever break. Rachel's voice softened. You've got your mother's hands. And your heart, Mason added. Ava smiled proudly. That's why it beats loud. Later, after she'd gone to bed, Mason stood by the window, looking out at the city lights blinking in the distance. Rachel joined him, slipping her hand into his. She's growing so fast, she whispered. I know, he said. She's already teaching me things I didn't know I'd forgotten. Rachel leaned her head against his shoulder. Like what? He smiled faintly. That love doesn't fix you all at once. It just makes you brave enough to keep fixing yourself. Outside, sirens wailed faintly, a reminder that somewhere, someone else's story was beginning. Another heartbreaking, another being healed. Rachel's voice was quiet but certain. It's strange, she said. For so long, I thought I wanted to leave something behind. But now I think the real legacy is living it. Together. Mason kissed her hair. You already left something behind, he murmured. A blueprint for the kind of world worth healing. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. And you built it. He smiled. With a lot of help. From the next room, Ava's small voice called sleepily, Good night, Mommy. Good night, Daddy. They both turned toward the sound, smiling. Good night, sweetheart, Rachel whispered. Mason's arm tightened gently around her waist. The world outside continued, alive and indifferent, but here, in this quiet room with its marigold-scented air, a crayon drawing on the wall, and a family that almost wasn't, everything was right. The camera of memory pulled back, framing the last image. The table where Ava's old get-well card lay beside a stack of new ones. On top, one message stood out in childish handwriting. Dear Mom, get well soon. Love is medicine too. Below it, written in Mason's familiar script, and love keeps beating. Fade out. Some stories don't end. They keep beating quietly inside us. If this one touched your heart, please take a moment to share it, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story of love, healing, and second chances. Because sometimes, the strongest medicine isn't made in labs, it's written in crayon.